of diagnosis, facilitated by RISE, and they will introduce themselves a little later. All right, next slide. So welcome if this is your first MAP workshop or if you've been with us before. Here is our mission statement. Feel free to look at more online. But Midwest Access Project envisions a society in which every person has access to comprehensive, high quality, patient-centered sexual and reproductive health care in their community. Improving access to comprehensive reproductive health care by training providers in abortion, miscarriage care, contraception, and pregnancy options counseling. Rooted in the Midwest, MAP's innovative training model fills gaps nationwide in medical education and clinical training. Next slide. So it is our collective responsibility here to acknowledge that Midwest Access Project was founded on stolen land, listed here. We recognize not only the historical stewardship of these lands, but also the ongoing efforts of Indigenous communities to protect and sustain them. The impacts of colonization continue to affect Indigenous peoples, especially Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse individuals who face systemic barriers to health and safety. We honor the resilience of Indigenous communities and stand in solidarity with their ongoing efforts to reclaim land, life, and culture. In recognizing the injustices of the past and present, we commit to supporting Indigenous sovereignty and advancing reproductive justice for all. And we have some links. I'll go ahead and put them in the chat, the Harvard bias test and voluntary land taxes. And I will turn it over to Rise.
Hello, folks. I am Rise. My pronouns are they, them, or they, he. Zoom is a hater and never lets me fix my pronouns. This is Jelly Ferocious in my arms. Her pronouns are they, she. She hangs out sometimes in the beginning and then she goes away. Before we start, I want to do community agreements or what I call collective support agreements. So they are name your access needs based on what feels best for you. Know that they're ongoing and that's okay. Get up, do what you got to do, no matter what. I don't care. You're an adult. Live your life in your body. Use I statements when you are sharing. Please speak from your perspective. 3 before me or move up, move back. If you find that you're sharing a lot and like there are other people with their hands up, be like, okay, 3 people got to go before I share again. If you are somebody who doesn't share a lot, but you want to, know this is a time where you can test that out if you like. Assume best intent / own impact / ask questions. So usually facilitators leave it at assume best intent, right? But because we never know what the power dynamics are in a room, including a Zoom room, we can't always assume best intent, nor should we. And so if you can do so, but if you are somebody who impacts someone, own it. Or if you want more questions, you have more questions, know that you can ask questions in this space. Show up for your folks. So that includes the people here and the people who are not here, consider their perspective in this space or what it would be in this space. Respect privacy. So nobody should be going back telling folks whole life stories. We don't do that, AKA HIPAA. Take care, again, do what you need to do. And please don't share the slides without consent. Because I'm poor. No, I'm not poor. I'm a little broke though. So reach out and talk to me. I'd love to hear from y'all. So if you agree to these agreements, give me an emoji or a woot. Delicious. Let's get into it. I love y'all so bad. We may not get to really do this the way that I want to do it. But if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, please introduce yourself with your name, pronouns, access needs, if any, or you could say all my access needs are met. And what kind of silly bug would you be? Okay, so we've hit our 5 minutes. I love y'all all. Yes, continue being bugs. Thank you so much. Oopsies. So where am I coming from? Just a little bit, just a little bit. I've been a care worker for over 10 years, specifically a birth worker in hospitals, and then people's homes for 7 years. I am neurodivergent or neurospicy, as I like to say. I'm Black, non-binary, and queer. I am physically disabled, so I have chronic pain, and I'm also immunocompromised. I try to be an abolitionist. God's not done with me yet. I who laughed. I was raised middle class, and that is the main source of my privilege. And so, though I would be considered working class now, it still impacts how I see through the world. And so I think that's really important, especially when you have like a lot of marginalized identities, to be able to pinpoint the ways in which you are still privileged. Learning from other neurodivergent folks, especially those who are racialized and those who like can't mask, right? There's a lot of neurodivergent folks who have higher needs and have never had to consider like choosing to unmask or not. I learned a lot from folks who share my identities that are also more marginalized than me, right? Because you can share multiple identities and still have different life experience. I learned a lot from incarcerated folks, and I learned a lot from observing how we kind of like unconsciously police each other, like in our interpersonal lives. I'm rooted in the belief that any external diversity work should also be internal. Hi, hello. In Black feminist and womanist praxis, I love Audre Lorde, love her beloved ancestor, and the disabled wisdom as a means of collective liberation, and from my community and learning from and loving them. I'm also rooted in like a lot of unnecessariness in the medical system. Darwin and Sir Francis Galton, they was cousins, and they are the ones who created eugenics in 1833, right? Eugenics was the belief that one could weed out certain quote unquote undesirable traits to improve the quote unquote genetic quality of the human population, right? And it we see that. Oh, I'm muted. I love you, whoever you are. Can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. And we see that, and like being fat phobic is a form of eugenics, right? Like because they are trying to weed out what they deem as undesirable, which are fat people or overweight people, because also fatness is subjective, right? And the BMI is also racist. And in order to like improve the quality of the human population. But you think about it, these are just like physical traits that people justify eugenics as, not traits like being loving, compassionate, kind, like caring about community. I think that's interesting. I'm rooted in the history of what is referred to as the ugly laws. And they started around 1867. So they are labeled the ugly laws, but they're intentionally any type of law that is intended to keep, quote, this is in the newspaper, diseased, maimed, mutilated, and in any way deformed, so as to be unsightly or disgusting object out of public view. And so an example of an ugly law now is major cities, especially major cities, outlawing being houseless, right? Criminalizing people and arresting people for feeding and giving water to unhoused people. Why is that your business? You not housing them. Um, the the Flexer report of 1910, which actually I just remembered, I will send a link to this whole report. It's actually online. It's like over 100 pages. But long story short, this report was commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation. Adam Flexner was a businessman, so he was not a physician at all. They commissioned him to go and audit all of the medical schools that were in existence at that time. What they wanted him to do was to write a report that was so scathing that it would professionalize medicine. And that is exactly what he did. He audited all the medical schools, and there were 7 all-Black medical schools at the time. By the time this report had got widespread, there were only 2 all-Black medical schools left. He also audited Black and Indigenous midwives, and he labeled them as dirty, as unskilled. And this is the reason why the shift went from Black and Indigenous midwives delivering babies to white male physicians in hospitals, right? And so there's a lot of other things, and read cautiously, but that the Flexen Report is something that people just don't know about, right? The non-consensual and anti-Black history of obstetrics itself and gynecology. J. Merriam Sims is considered the father of modern gynecology, but he is only considered that because he built his reputation and his career on a non-consensual experimentation of Black enslaved women, right? And then also remembering that disability is the largest marginalized identity in the US and the world. And among that, 1 in 4 Black people are disabled. And so considering that, when we consider the people who are coming up to us, who are our clients, who are patients, and who aren't, right? Because even though we may not have clients or patients like this, that doesn't mean that we can not consider the role that they had to play to get the advancements in medicine and care work today. Oh no, am I frozen? Oh no, hold on. Hold 1 second. Oh Lord.
I think you're good.
Okay, it froze on my end. Ooh. All right, so we are going to go over fat phobia, access needs, access tools, ableism, disability, trauma-informed care, trauma responsiveness. We already did the history. We're going to talk about like kind of currently what's happening. And then if we have time, I have 4 practice scenarios at the end, and people always love practice scenarios, but I will at least read through one of them, and then they can be take-home practice scenarios depending on how much time we have. Let me look at the chat real quick. Okay, woot. So what is fat phobia? Oh my goodness. Fat phobia is the negative assumptions, beliefs, and stereotypes about fat people in bigger bodies that is defined as acceptable. This leads to bullying, stigma, mistreatment, and dehumanization, right? So we say like assumptions, beliefs, stereotypes because none of them, many of them are true, right? And even if they are true, that does not mean that you treat somebody with less humanity ever. Not even less humanity than you want to be treated with, but less humanity, period, right? Fat phobia is also inherently anti-Black and ableist. Why is it anti-Black? Fat phobia stems from the transatlantic slave trade. These are 2 quotes from an interview that Sabrina Strings, who wrote the book Fear of the Black Body, said in a recent interview. So she said, 1, in the transatlantic slave trade, colonists and race scientists suggested that Black people were sensuous and thus prone to sexual and oral excesses. Protestantism encouraged temperance in all pleasures, including those of the palate. By the early 19th century, particularly in the US, fatness was deemed evidence of immorality and racial inferiority. You see how people just mix up all types of things just to make somebody not human? She goes on to say, race was integral to the issue. At the onset of the transatlantic slave trade, skin color was often used to determine racial belonging. But by the 18th century, skin color, after years of interracial sex in the colonies, proved to be a poor sorting mechanism. So they were trying to be OG racist, but then they realized they couldn't do that. So they said, my God, how can we be racist in another way? She goes on to say, what we had by the 19th century was a new racial discourse that suggested Black people were also inherently voracious. Combine this with the displacement of poor Europeans in the 19th century, i.e., Irish, Southern Italians, and Russian Jews. The white Americans were being advised to fear Black people, as well as these degraded or supposedly part Black Europeans, who are also purportedly identifiable by their weight and skin color. Wild. And then the BMI, because the BMI is racist, like many medical inventions are racist, because anytime your sample size is only white cis men, something's going awry, right? Something is not going to work out. Fat phobia is ableist because fat phobia does not consider medical and social models of disability. And we're going to go over what those mean later on. Many fat people actually have similar access and mobility needs as physically disabled people. So while a fat person is not inherently disabled, they still have similar needs to disabled people. For example, range of seating, right? Seating at all. Many fat people experience similar dehumanization as disabled people, including being blamed for their fatness or their fatness being categorized as immoral. And we see that with disabled people being blamed for their disabilities, or like it's a sin, or like something happened and it's their fault all the time. Fat folks and disabled folks both get denied life-saving care due to being high risk all the time, right? So there are, what was it, 2 years ago when folks started reporting that if it said that they had long COVID on their chart, they were being denied life insurance, right? So that's discrimination. And life insurance companies deny fat people or jack up the monthly price depending on your weight all the time. That actually happened to me. The only reason why my life insurance is low is because he told me, he was like, well, just lose weight and I'm gonna put it right here. And I was like, okay, sir, I'm not, but thanks. Being fat is considered a pre-existing condition, which obviously impacts life insurance and also impacted COVID response, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Fat people were among a lot of folks, were also among cognitively disabled folks who were, medical providers were being told not to save them or not to prioritize them, right? Because they were not healthy enough, worth enough to be saved. They needed to focus on saving what they defined as healthy people, and rationing, what is it called? Rationing the breathing, the mechanisms that help you breathe. They had to ration those. Ventilators. Thank you, Krish. So fat phobia is both and anti-Black and ableist. Some examples are diabetes is not always because a person is Black or fat, right? Just because something it runs in a specific race does not mean that like that is the reason why they're having health issues. Stress enables a higher prevalence of diabetes. I did not know this. I had to find that out by myself, which now that I have prediabetes, it makes so much sense because my A1C went up after I quit my job a few years ago. Of course, I was financially unstable for the first time in my adult life. Stress also enables disordered sleep and insomnia, which if you are a person who is trying to lose weight, a lot of like medical research says that like sleep is like one of the biggest hindrances to not losing weight. Like your body has to rest. Both Black and fat people have been assumed to have thicker skin. That is not true. Like, but that still results in healthcare providers not believing both Black and fat people because of not believing their pain because of this very antiquated reality. And like this antiquated belief is the reason why um they get labeled as drug seeking because they're not actually being adequately treated, right? That's a disability justice issue as well. And it's like, in fact, like it's actually the inverse that fat folks actually have experience higher pain levels, right? I don't know why. Listen, the article did not tell me why, but I read it. It is that fat folks actually experience higher levels of pain. And so when you're already being dehumanized because you're fat, and let's say you're also fat and Black, and people are looking at you like you are attention seeking, drug seeking, it is very easily to slip through the cracks and to slip all the way down into like medical negligence induced conditions. Fat phobia can also be internalized, unconscious for all of us, right? Systematic, preferred by institutions to keep status quo. So if they can control your body in any way, they can control you. Must be consistently reflected upon both individually and in community to disrupt. And it can be enacted by everyone, including other fat folks, right? So none of us are exempt from trying to like unlearn the things that are within us. And I think especially for people who were raised as girl children, who are women or femme people, we experience the brunt of that often, right? And sometimes if you like go, even just like consider going 1 hour, just thinking about all of the internalized fat phobic comments you think about of yourself. It's a lot. It can't. So I'm adding things about ableism and access because, again, fat phobia to me is a disability justice issue, and it's also ableist. So this is my favorite definition of ableism. It is a working definition by Talila T.L. Lewis, who is a Black defense attorney who supports Black, deaf, and hard of hearing incarcerated people and recently released people. So TL goes on to say, ableism is a system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normality, intelligence, excellence, desirability, and productivity. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in anti-Blackness, eugenics, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. A systemic oppression leads to people in society determining who is valuable and worthy based on a person's language, appearance, religion, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. And my most favorite part, which I bolded, you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. So we're gonna pause here and I wanna hear from y'all. You can either drop your thoughts in the chat or unmute yourself and share what comes up for you when you read this definition. Brenda Vani says, this is reminding me that you do not have to be trans to also experience transphobia. Hello, because gender is also racialized. And so there are many people who have, like Black women, who are cisgender, who have actually been stopped and accosted and accused of not being women when they're trying to use the restroom. Isn't that something? Thank you for that. Krish, I feel so affirmed by what you presented so far as a fat, disabled, prone person. Yay! Joe reminds me of how systems of oppression are interconnected and that ableism comes through all throughout society. I see it especially in higher ed. Absolutely, absolutely. And that ableism goes past just physical disabilities. Yes. Um, Regardless of like where you are in school, but yes, especially higher ed, professors, they do not want to work with you to on your accommodations, especially if it's an accommodation that requires you to be out or to be late or to have extra time on something. They often still see it as like cheating and an unfair advantage, which is ableist because they don't know about the things that you need. Ashlyn, I appreciate the inclusion of behave and reproduce in this working definition. Behave is really striking to me as I feel like this is an area, come on, where interpersonal policing happens a lot. Absolutely. I was talking to one of my friends who is a brown South Indian person, and we were talking about how um a lot of us growing up were probably neurodivergent and or autistic, but didn't really notice it because the ways that our cultures are, they allow for neurodivergent traits that white cultures don't allow for. For example, Black people hum and sway and sing to themselves all the time. That that in like the US version or like criteria of autism is like can be considered like excessive stimming, but that's just what we do, right? And so if you don't have a full cultural understanding of a person's behavior, you will automatically pathologize them. Awesome. Thank y'all so much. So, woo, what is access? Access is providing the ability to do, have, and or be with regards to existing, living, thriving, working, creating, learning, communicating, and interacting, intimacy with self and others, and more, times infinity. Obviously, this is a working definition by me because no formal definition is going to say infinity. We all benefit from and need access. And then I just added that accommodation is assistance with doing, having, and or being. And so when you think accommodation is kind of like the bar, right? It's just like, here's a way to do this. But access is really what we are looking for. How do we provide that? And it doesn't have to be complete and total access all the time. That's impossible because we are all such multi-layered human beings. But that does not mean we shouldn't always try. Kat is saying in the chat, what's coming up for me is the idea that time is money. And so if you and your body need time that doesn't match someone else's agenda, you're a threat to profit instead of that way of sharing space being a threat to community. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, because for some reason people are like allergic to taking care of each other. Access needs. So access needs are anything a person needs to exist, live, or thrive, and participate in their life, in the world, in the ways that they want, need, and inherently deserve. And this is really important to me, that does not cause undue burning to them, right? A lot of times, especially those of us who are disabled, we often are managing urgent access needs all the time. And because we are managing and responding to those needs, then we kind of like let our other access needs that are lesser or like more medium just exist until we can meet our urgent needs. But what happens is if we then ignore those smaller access needs, they also become urgent. And then the cycle continues. What's really important to me is that we all have access needs. Subcategories of access needs are living beings. So emotional support animals, guide dogs, service animals. Jelly is my medical alert dog. You saw her earlier. She just be here to make sure I'm all right. She don't really be trying to talk to the people. Tools like masks, respirators, ramps, medicine like acupuncture, leaves. You know what I mean by leaves. Actions like dimming sidewalks, salting sidewalks, not blocking curb cuts. A fun fact is that disabled people are the reason why we have curb cuts, right? Before, like the curb cuts were not intuitive to developers at the time. Like, can you imagine just just having a whole curve? Like, and this is an example of when you center the most marginalized in the things that they are asking for, everybody benefits. I don't always like that route, but I think it's a more expansive way to say it because we should just want to center the most marginalized, but oftentimes we do need to see all the ways that things are benefit from. So yes, disabled people benefit the most from curb cuts, but so do elders, so do young people, right? So do people who are pushing strollers, so do temporarily able-bodied people with hella groceries and luggage, and right. And so like thinking about that, like we should have been at that, you know? Yes. Barandavi says, and everyone benefits. Cade, universal design benefits everyone. Some other categories of access needs are emotional support. And then sometimes it's just awareness, right? So have you ever, have you ever been annoyed by someone and with whatever they're doing, and then you get to know them and they tell you a thing and you're just like, oh, oops. Like sometimes a person's access need is just to be able to share their disability so that folks can adjust their actions to them or show them grace. We do not come automatically graceful people, unfortunately, right? There are times when we need grace and there's times when we need to give others grace, and awareness can help that a lot. So access needs can be the same and differ at level of need, can differ between fat people because we're all different, can overlap, can also conflict, and can shift based on environment. And so an example of access needs, especially as a fat person, that overlap and conflict is that one of my needs, something that helps my body as a fat person is eating 3 times a day. I feel so much better when I get up, I get breakfast, I have lunch, I have dinner. But I also have insomnia. It's very hard for me to get up and get going in the morning. And so for a long time, I often either skipped breakfast and just had coffee, right? And then by the time lunchtime, I was ravenous, and then I ended up spending all my money on lunch. Or I skipped breakfast and lunch because I was working so much, and then by dinner time happened, I was so hungry that I was binging. And then because I was binging, I was bloated. And because I was bloated, I was in pain, and so on, right? And so what I've done in that way now is awareness of myself. I'm often nauseous in the morning. I don't know why, but like that's the time of the morning when I'm most nauseous. And so I have found things that are very easy for me to grab and eat in the morning, even when I'm half asleep. I let go of like feeling like I had to like make a full breakfast in order for it to be real. So I get up, I eat a banana, I eat some applesauce, and I take my meds. That's good enough for me because it is still breakfast and it's helped me immensely. Heather, oof, yes, it is a cascade of unmet access needs. So some access needs for fat people in general. So overarching self-determination, right? Like I think especially for fat folks, because like fatness is one of those things where people feel like it's their business all the time. People like, for example, somebody who is fat and just running on the trail, that you got this, you gonna make it, you gonna do. How do you know they just not a runner? Why do you have to do that? And then you don't do that with skinny people. You just don't. Autonomy, information, right? Like actual information. For example, if I knew that diabetes, that stress enables and causes, like increases your risk of diabetes, and that it's not just about what you eat, I would have been so much better, I think, on figuring out how to manage my pre-diabetes. I might not even have pre-diabetes, right? Because that would have been like, oh shoot, stress. Let me think about how I can manage this, right? Because the thing was, I wasn't managing my stress, and because I wasn't managing my stress, I was binge eating. Cascade again. Informed consent, right? Not just, hey, oops. Okay. Somebody sent me a message. um, so informed consent. Sometimes it's not, sometimes you need more than just consent, especially when you're receiving care, right? So informed consent for a fat person, let's say a fat person is getting a massage, right? Consent would be like, hey, can I touch you here, right? But our bodies are different. And so informed consent can be like, hey, this is going like massaging you this place is going to help do XYZ or whatever. Like, how does it feel if I do this? Especially with things that are very heavily stigmatized, like people's bellies, people's chests, like things like that. Like, that's what informed consent looks like, can look like. Time, right? People just need time to exist. A safer space to ask questions and disagree, especially when you're receiving care from a medical provider, because regardless of the identity, it seems like medical providers just don't want people to ask them questions or disagree with them because they're the ones who went to school. All right, you went to school for 8 years. I've been in my body for 35. Let's collaborate. Hello. And emotional support. Like, support your clients, even if they disagree with you. Some tangible or specific, like slash specific needs are support people, right? So like we all need support people. So like folks that come to the doctor's office visits with us, people to bounce ideas off of. If we're care workers, right? We're like, I don't know, how do I like figure this out, right? Mobility aids. Again, fat folks need mobility aids as well. Pillows, blankets, like comfy environments. Medical like spaces, like care work spaces don't always have to be sterile, right? You can figure out like what needs to be in a space and like then go from there. Range of seating, sometimes them seats they're a little stressful. Like, what's going on? Choice of providers, which is an access need, but not everybody has, because not everybody has the type of insurance that will allow them to have a choice of provider. Childcare, having like providers having non-patronizing tones with them. It is a thing that like many providers, I think like many care workers and healers in general do have kind of like that tone where they're talking to the person like they're stupid. I don't like to say that word, but like that's basically what it is. So like think about like, are you speaking at eye level with the person that you're talking to, right? Or are you above them? Maybe if you're above them, sit down, right? Like, have you been talking for a long time to that person? Maybe ask them if they have questions. Actual fat healthcare providers, right? So like fat friendly for providers and actually fat healthcare providers. And then information about insurance coverage. So I think this is something that, hold on, my battery is My battery is low. We're transferring. So this is something that I know that a lot of providers don't want to get involved with. Like they kind of feel like, okay, I'm doing the care work and then insurance is something else. But it's actually really jarring to like get care and then realize you have to pay out of pocket, right? And then you have nobody to talk to about it. Excuse me. So some access tools. What are access tools? It's anything that is usually like an object that allows a person to access their own body, the world, intimacy, other objects, and any other mode of functioning that they want, need, or to survive, live, and or thrive any easier in any part of their life. So some access tools that promote fat affirming care are mobility aids, again, range of seating, range of speculums. If you're somebody who does gynecological care or birth work, I didn't know for a long time that there was a range of speculums. And now I'm like, give me that tiny thing, right? And I think that this goes along with like some providers' belief that fat people don't experience as much pain. It's like we can experience a range of pain in the same way that someone who isn't fat is. And that can look like we actually need smaller speculums, even though we are bigger, right? Right? Because your cervix doesn't always grow as you get fat. That's odd. Like, Rendavami. You can also insert the speculum yourself or have your hands on it while the provider is inserting. Absolutely. Evidence-based research. A lot of research about like fat folks is so outdated and actually fat phobic. And so it can be hard to sift through research that actually like makes sense, right? And so like that's something that is like necessary to be ongoing. Accurate anesthesia levels, right? Needle length. So this is something that I learned at the height of COVID is that if you are 200 pounds or over, you actually need a longer needle when you get a vaccine. And so now when I get vaccines, I advocate for myself and I say, hey, I'm over 200 pounds. Can I have the longer needle? And I've actually been met with like really like compassionate needler people. They've been like, oh my God, like I stopped saying that because like people would get offended, but like you do need a longer needle. And I'm like, yeah, give it to me, girl. Like community agreements, like I think that like people think that community agreements are only in like places like this, but you can put them everywhere, like, you know, and it's really, I think it's really helpful for a provider to have like their own kind of like community agreements that they give to the people that they're caring for and supporting and being like, this is what I agree to in our like relationship. Understanding, right? Plain language. This is hard one. This is a hard one. As a care worker, I'm such a nerd. I'd be like, yes, and this, and this, and this, and this. And then sometimes my clients are like, what? And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Let me back up, right? Not speaking in plain language can be very intimidating for a person, especially if they have experienced a lot of bias in their journey of seeking care. And then explicit expectations, right? And sometimes I think providers don't want to do this because their expectations are fucked up. But like think about like what are your expectations, if any, for the people who are seeking care from you? Excuse me. So I did want to note this slide is just talking about like normalized access tools versus stigmatized access tools. And I added this slide because I wanted to show that like a lot of times the only reason why an access tool is stigmatized is because it hasn't been mass produced yet. So a normalized access tool is a remote control, right? Helps us access the TV without having to get up. Elevators and escalators, lighting, range of lighting, automatic car windows and doors, helmets, knee pads, seat belts, right? Some access tools are so mass produced that they're required by law. The internet, over-the-counter pain meds, And then you look at the side where access tools are still stigmatized, canes, right? Like those are stigmatized in a way that people only think elders need them. And they actually will fucking harass you if you don't look old enough or disabled enough to use a cane. Wheelchairs and rollators, same. Respirators. So I still mask 5 years into the pandemic. Thankfully, I'm in a large city, and so I don't get bothered by it. But I know I have other folks I'm in community with who are in smaller cities and towns who absolutely get followed in the store for wearing a mask. That's horrible. Especially because we wore masks even before the pandemic. What? Captions are becoming normalized, thank goodness, but they're definitely still stigmatized. And feeding tubes and colostomy bags, right? Glasses, says Heather. Yes. Daisy, wearing sunglasses indoors because of lighting being out of our control. Absolutely. Socks with grips on the soles. Oh Lord, not the grippy socks. So it's fine. Sorry. Had a thought. Audiobooks. Absolutely. Yay. I love that y'all are giving examples. Please keep it up. I love when you talk to me. So this is an activity. Identify, again, either in the chat or unmute yourself, an access tool that helps you personally. And how would it feel if you suddenly no longer had access to that tool? How would you navigate the world? Bluetooth, yes, absolutely. Reading glasses since I turned 50, yes. Joe, personally, I use captions on everything. And if I did not have them, I would not be able to focus nearly as well. It would impact how I understand almost everything. Yes. Lauren, subtitles. I would not understand my favorite shows as well and would probably need to read summaries or rewind often. This is me with books. When I tell you I read the same chapter over and over, I'm like, oh, help. Daisy, oof, when I wasn't wearing sunglasses indoors, I noticed I had more frequent panic attacks in public. Wow, that's a really good observation. Jamie, captioning is a big deal for me on TV and YouTube. Yeah, I need it. I'm sorry. Like I can't I can't go back on the captions. Clay, my cane helps me when I'm having a lot of knee pain, and subtitles help me to focus better on what I'm watching. Absolutely. Aiden, access to class lectures before to aid my auditory dyslexia. I would likely not be able to pass medical school classes. That is so important. And I really hate the way that medical schools treat disabled students. Like, we need more disabled doctors. Heather, I have diabetes and take insulin. Access need is having juice, soda, fast-acting sugar easily available. I can die without it. Yes. You know what's interesting to me is that because this diabetes and also sickle cell is still considered just a Black disease, people don't take it seriously. Isn't that interesting? Like, Anna, where did Anna go? Having meetings and workshops. Hold on, let me scroll back. Like this available on Zoom. So I don't have to leave the house. Listen, virtual hybrid, we're here, honey. I'm not going back. All right. Like the thought of physically with my body going to a no. Give me the link. Tal, my car, I would not be able to run errands on bad days without it because public transit becomes just too much. Such an expensive access tool. Same for me. Yeah. As a disabled person, I need my car. Sorry. Like, and I love public transportation. But if it was more accessible, I would absolutely use it. But the ventilation, it's disgusting. Like half of the stations don't have elevators. Ain't no way. Cat, stools when I need to reach something, footrests when I need to sit, because the average height of many things is higher than what works for my legs. Without them, my storage and my posture would be different, very much so. Cade, notes app on my phone, freezer, and microwave to easily and quickly make food at the end of the day. I love that, Cade, because I just did that. I be trying to make food and then I be like just losing my shit because I be trying to be like, what's the temperature of this chicken need to be? But now I made I made a note of the temperatures and I feel so much better. Briar, where did Briar go? I dislocated my shoulder recently and have really been appreciating automatic doors even more than normal. Also, I'd be completely unable to get out of my house without my glasses. I broke mine recently and it was rough. I'm so sorry. I also really, fuck with the new automatic doors where you just wave your hand. That's cute. Kara, I take oral chemo and need to know where the bathrooms are all around me at all times because I often don't have time to find it when GI symptoms kick in. I often go into a space and say, hi, nice to meet you. Can you tell me where your bathroom is? I mean, I think that's a lovely greeting. Christina, the personal shopping carts, IDK, they have a name. As someone who walks to the supermarket in a very hilly neighborhood, my little cart is so helpful. And the option to have 2 times speed on video, heavy, because ADHD can absolutely be a disability. Where's my brain? I don't know. Thank y'all so much. We are going to talk about disability, and then after that, take a little 5-minute break, because by then we will be at the hour. So what is disability? So this is what I talked about earlier, the models of disability. There are more than 2, but I'm going to focus on these 2. So the medical model of disability says a model by which illness or disability is the result of a physical condition, is intrinsic to the individual, so part of their own body, may reduce the individual's quality of life, and causes clear disadvantages to them. The focus is on their impairment and how that excludes them from mainstream society. And then the social model of disability says disability is caused by the way society is organized, rather than by a person's impairment or difference. It looks at ways of removing barriers that restrict life choices for disabled people. When barriers are removed, disabled people can be independent and equal in society with choice and control over their own lives. And it's important to note that this model was developed by disabled people. So when you look at both these models, what do you notice? The medical model is incredibly individualistic and almost entirely negative. Yeah. And I love that you said that because both of you actually, because this also applies obviously to being fat affirming, is that society is structured in a way in the US in that only certain white and or affluent neighborhoods have an abundance of walkable grocery stores, right? And so when you think about that, like that is going to impact people's nutrition. And so oftentimes fat people are treated as if they just work hard enough, they can lose weight, right? But 1, what if they don't want to? And 2, what if what's going on with them is not weight related at all, right? And I also would say that, like, even though the social model is obviously fantastic, much more better than a medical model, I would critique / push back a little bit over being independent. I think we all want to be independent and we all deserve to be. And also, independence shouldn't be the only goal we have, right? Like I want to be independent in some things, and I want to be interdependent, independent on my community for other things, because I just can't do it all. You know, I really feel like when I quit my job, I really learned that the way to survive, you either got to have money or you got to have community. And if you ain't got either, so help you. um Hey, we did it. We did it. So we're at the hour-ish. So please, wherever you are in the world, take a 5-minute break and come back at 37 after the hour. Thank y'all so much for coming back. Thank you, Lana, for the owl. If you would like, you do not have to, but I would love if we take one collective breath. And if you are down for that, inhale through your nose and sigh out. Sometimes when we're learning new things or even just like taking in information from a new person, it can just like sit in our bodies. And I want it to, be able to move around and exist. And also I know that like it's the evening for all of us. Oh, look at the puffer fish. Okay, I'm done. This is a graphic, which I will be sending the link to in the resources with the PowerPoint of the medical industrial complex that Mia Mingus co-created with other folks in their community. And so I just added this because it is so comprehensive to me and also incredibly detailed. And so, folks usually ask, like, how do you read this? And so, so at the top, it says the medical industrial complex in Black text. Underneath that, in gray text, it says profit, power, control, exploitation, ableism, oppression, violence, trauma. There are 4 different colors of this square rectangle. In the center, there are 4 different rectangles. Eugenics is on the left center. On the top eugenics is on the left in red. Desirability is on the right in green. Under desirability is population control in purple. Under eugenics is charity and ableism in yellow. So, for example, desirability is in the center in green, and then there's a green arrow going from the center to the top right, and that square is in green, and it's labeled health. Population control is going to the bottom right, that is labeled safety in purple. Charity and ableism is going to the bottom left, that is labeled access in yellow. And eugenics is going to science and medicine, that is labeled red and is the top left. So what do y'all think about when you see this? Do you see your profession on here? Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And so the one of the many aims of this is to show us that like on the outer, science and medicine, health, safety, and access are what is sold to us. But then in the center, eugenics, desirability, charity and ableism, and population control is what happens actually so that they can sell us. They do population control in the way of assisted living facilities, in the way of psychiatric incarceration to sell us safety, right? But what if we decide that that's not how we want safety to be? So this is thing that I made. The intersections of ableism and fat phobia in healthcare. And so going from the top right corner all the way around to the left, access to reproductive care, mixed diagnosis, conservatorships, COVID response and vaccine apartheid, capitalist definitions of productivity, food access, US healthcare system, police and prisons, simultaneous adultification and adultism towards Black and Brown children and young people, reproductive violence, redlining and gentrification and houselessness, anti-Blackness and xenophobia, and criminalizing sex work. Are there any bubbles that y'all would like me to expand upon as to why I put them down for that they are intersections of ableism and fat phobia in healthcare? Could you say a little bit more conservatorships? Yes. So conservatorships are basically often we hear about people being put into conservatorships because they are unable to make decisions for themselves. They are disabled in such a way that they are unable to make decisions for themselves. I think that Britney Spears' story really blew up in a way that showed a lot of us who had no idea about what conservatorships were, like what that looks like. And we can use that story to see how exploited she was. So that conservatorships have control, like whoever has placed you in a conservatorship, it is like can sign off, controls everything. They control everything down to your money, to your reproduction, right? They made Britney Spears be on birth control. She did not want to be on birth control in that way, but she had no choice because she was under a conservatorship. She was essentially incarcerated by the people who had her in a conservatorship, her family, right? Incarcerated, but not, right? Like not in a jail or prison, but she had effectively no autonomy in her life and no access to her money. Something that a lot of folks don't know is that it's not just family that can make the case to put you in a conservatorship because you are quote unquote too disabled to manage everyday life. Banks can put you in a conservatorship. A bank can take hold of your money and put you in a conservatorship and control your money. And so I think that that is absolutely an intersection of ableism and fat phobia in healthcare, because it is doctors who support making the case that you have to be in a conservatorship. Medical providers hold so much unnecessary power, and if not used intentionally, it can upend everybody's life, right? And fatness is one of many reasons that a person can be put in a conservatorship. Someone can make the case, a family member can make the case that they are a danger to themselves, that they have no control, and so that they need to be controlled by someone else, right? And fat people and disabled people absolutely are looked at very similarly by healthcare providers and by mainstream society. Yes, banks. Daisy, the very real and reasonable fears of things like this is what limits access to the care needed. Absolutely. Absolutely, because you don't want to walk into the urgent care and then all of a sudden your life then flipped upside down because a medical provider was being weird. Are there any other bubbles that you will want me to expand upon? Hey, I know this is big, so like you could feel free to just sit with it. Psychiatric incarceration, absolutely, absolutely, especially because there are some quote unquote good ones, sure, like, but at the same time, many times when someone is incarcerated psychiatrically, the people that work there are horrible and they treat them horrible, and they think that they can treat them horrible because they're quote unquote mentally ill. And that, I don't know how you can be that. Um, Kate, can you talk more about how you define adultification separately from adultism as they relate to ableism and fat phobia? Absolutely. So adultification can happen with any young person, right? And it looks like adults looking at a child and placing adult expectations on them, right? And not only expectations, but sometimes looking at them as an adult, not allowing them to be children for any reason. And so Black children are overrepresented in being adultified because a lot of people look at Black children, one, as they are not children, or two, as if they are older than they are. And that leads to adultification, which also leads to lack of compassion, right? When Black young people are harmed or killed, that leads to like furthering anti-Black behaviors, right? And then adultism is essentially thinking that you are inferior. I'm not inferior, that you are superior as an adult to young people, which again can happen to all young people, right? But I noticed that it happens more often towards young Black people, specifically young Black girls or girl children. And that looks like not listening to young people, not taking Black children seriously, not believing them. And in my life, and in the lives of many other Black adults who were children before, I've noticed that it happens at the same time for some silly reason. They'll be like, oh, you're just a child. What do you know? But then will also speak to you and seek refuge in you as if you are their peer. And that leads to ableism and transphobia and fat phobia, because many Black children either go overdiagnosed for neurodivergence and mental illness, or underdiagnosed. And it's because of these things, right? Underdiagnosed because they're like, oh, like they're just a child. Like, what do they know? Like, they're just behaving badly, right? We talk about ableism and how to behave. But then I also notice that fat Black children are seen even less as human beings and as children. It's the fatness that makes a person look at a young person and think they are not the age that they are. And that is something that I experienced as a fat child. And so that also leads to ableism, because they just tell you, in the same way that they tell adults, just lose weight. Oh, your kid just needs to go outside and run. But for me, the case is that I was on steroids for my asthma. I had asthma, the steroids caused me to gain weight. I couldn't get the weight off, but then I couldn't run because I had asthma. And it was just like a loop, right? If no one cares to break that loop, then the child is the one who suffers. And then I'll do two more: gentrification and sex work. Kat said, could you say more about gentrification? Yeah, oh my God, that's an easy one. Lord, we don't call them food deserts anymore. I really forgot the new word we're supposed to say, but essentially lack of food, period, especially healthy food in Black and brown and low income neighborhoods, right? Redlining contributes to that. Redlining was specifically not renting or selling to Black people, right? And then gentrification is like contemporary redlining. And so that leads to a higher prevalence of houselessness. When you are unhoused, you just take whatever you can, right? Which is going to always impact your body, not always make you fat or skinny, but it will impact your health, right? But because society is so obsessed with fatness, they don't consider how gentrification, which it in redlining, which leads to either Black and brown communities being pushed out as grocery stores and resources become built, or Black and brown communities never having resources in general. They don't consider that impacts their health, right? They just look and say, this person isn't working hard enough. And that's also part of the dehumanization of Black and brown fat people. Food apartheid. Thank you. Good Lord. Thank you. Yep, it is. That's what it is. And then the last one is criminalizing sex work and its intersections with ableism and fat phobia. Thank you. Thank y'all so much. So sex work is always, like, people are always trying to criminalize sex work because they just don't want people to make money and not give back to the government. That's my opinion, right? Because if you cared about, and then what the government does in order to continue criminalizing sex work, is to conflate sex work with sex trafficking. Those two are not the same. Even if somebody is doing survival sex work, that person is choosing to go into that act, right? Sex trafficking, someone has kidnapped you, someone is exploiting you, right? That's not the same thing. And both need attention, right? It's deplorable the way that sex trafficking is, especially in the US and the world, but especially here because we're here in the imperial core, as some people also refer to the US. And sex workers deserve protections. They cannot get protections if they're constantly being criminalized. How that intersects with ableism and fat phobia is that many disabled people are sex workers because the ways that we work are not standard for capitalism, right? A standard 9 to 5, taking public transportation or driving an hour to both ways to get to work, right? Like having to be on at all times. And because physical spaces are also not hospitable to fat people are also part of a population that turn towards sex work in order to get their financial needs met so they can support themselves, right? And we also talked about the ways that fat people are treated when they come into medical spaces and seek care. We also talked about the ways that fat people are misdiagnosed for seeking care, right? And being able to just get the care you need, sometimes people resort to sex work because sex work has more flexible hours. You can do it at your home or somebody else's home, right? You can wear what you want. But criminalizing it defeats that purpose. Okay, we have allegedly 25 more minutes, says Alyssa. It's possible I'm going to go over. If I do, know that you can leave. That's okay, but you can also stay. I'm going to finish to make sure that I finish the entire presentation, no matter how long it takes. And so when you get the recording, just know that even if there's just me and Alyssa here, the presentation will be finished. So fat phobia in healthcare spaces in general is or can be labeling people seeking care as disruptive or non-compliant, right? Just because you don't like it. Audibly making fun of or judging a person, or like you see a colleague doing that. Assuming the work of accessible spaces and being fat affirming is a set destination. It's not. Not being clear about what access support you have and do not have. training only healthcare providers in the same space on unlearning fat phobia, because let me tell you, the physician's assistants that be coming in and taking your inventory of things, they also need that training. They are ridiculous, as well as the front desk staff. Assuming your clients or anyone, especially racialized folks, are not compliant or not quote unquote serious about their health when they could be overwhelmed, don't have the resources, didn't even consent to your treatment plan, right? Or like being fat. And that's not even a reason that they came to you for care, right? Automatically categorizing fat people as high risk, as well as automatically categorizing fat pregnant people as high risk, or automatically telling them, oh, your blood pressure is gonna be so high, or you're gonna get gestational diabetes, your baby gonna be fat. Like, please, can we not? And not calling out your peers for their blatant fat phobia. Are there others you can think of? No worries. Fat phobia in healthcare specifically can be labeling clients or patients who don't like your specific plan for them as non-compliant or difficult, talking shit about your client without investigating your own behavior, discouraging mobility aids or gatekeeping in the info about mobility aids because you want them to work hard, when in reality, people become more mobile when they have access to mobility aids. Who knew? Not asking or not centering what the client wants to do. Linear evaluations, not being realistic, falling into wanting to cure people, right? What do you have in a session with wanting this person to lose 5, 10, 15 pounds, and why? Telling them what to change, but not considering how their life circumstances impact their health and weight. Putting too much emphasis on or celebrating weight loss without question, because even if like a fat person who all of a sudden lost weight, but they didn't change anything, that's a sign that something may be happening, may be awry. But if you're too excited about the weight loss, you as a provider will miss diagnosing this person or doing further tests or investigating what in their health may have changed. Heather says, always weighing at appointments when it's so often not necessary. Yes, absolutely. Be real clear about like when it's necessary and when it's not to weigh your clients. Daisy, something I navigate often is the fat phobia I experience for being fat while working in healthcare. That is so real. And I just want to tell you that my PCP is fat and I love her down and I will not leave her. Joe, I mean, I've had doctors blame my OCD and eating disorder on my size and refuse to discuss SSRIs with me for years. That's wild because that's one of our scenarios, Joe. My Lord. Vrindavani, I lost hella weight because of panic attacks and anxiety. People celebrated and I was like, I'm dying. Yes, right? Cade, praising weight loss even when disordered eating behaviors are disclosed. Exactly. And disordered, okay, we're gonna talk about it in a minute. Okay, it's fine. I'm getting ahead of myself. Deborah, excuse me, not having accessible clinics from the standpoint of body size. Example, chairs, exam spaces, placing blame on the bigger body person when these things are requested. Absolutely. Also refusing to believe fat people can have, okay, we're gonna do, oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. 1 second. Sorry, y'all. My neighbors, when they locked out, just like to buzz everybody. So that's what was happening. And Kate says, not stocking, oopsies, not stocking or using size inclusive medical equipment, gowns, blood pressure cups, especially those electronic blood pressure cups. Get it off of me. What is that? and then reading higher blood pressures in fat people because y'all are on it. You're on it already. My goodness. So, okay, I did something. There we are. So, short reflection question. We're going to skip it for time, but it's for you. So come back to it when you get the presentation. What are ways you have or still enact fat phobia? And I ask this question because I truly believe we do better together when we get vulnerable with ourselves. So just a question for y'all. Jojo says also ranges of size equipment like lifts, beds, commodes, right? Like I don't want to, oh, that's one of my fears is if I have to have an extended hospital stay and somebody is being weird about supporting me and using the bathroom. Okay. Remember, fat people can also be physically disabled, immunocompromised, chronically ill, neurodivergent, and that can have absolutely nothing to do with them being fat. Also, fat people can have EDs as well, and healthcare providers often cause and enable disordered eating based on literally everything y'all said. Like, did you read this presentation before? What? And so just a little bit of the health impacts of disordered eating, because like y'all said, like a lot of providers will not care that you have disordered eating, that you disclosed it because you're just losing weight. But disordered eating impacts your cardiovascular health, right? It impacts your gastrointestinal system. So like, for all the reasons, if in content note, if you are, throwing up or purging multiple times a day or regularly, or if you're binging every day, right? That is going to absolutely impact your gastrointestinal system from the bottom up. It impacts your neurological system. Literally, if you do not have enough nutrients in your body, you may become faint, you can be confused, you can experience higher rates of brain fog. And it impacts your endocrine system, which is like your libido, right? So are there others that y'all can think of that are health impacts of disordered eating? Mental health, says Joe, from increasing anxiety to being a trigger for OCD to leading people, depression and self-hatred. Absolutely. Cade also says bone density and muscle loss. Yes. Awesome. And thank y'all so much. If you have to go, it is 7:05. So like Alyssa said, you will get the entire recording. Do not worry. Dental and gum issues. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. Oh, and the acid reflux that comes. Oh my God. I can't go back to that. So building towards interrupting internalized fat phobia is also building towards being trauma informed and trauma responsive. Kidney issues, says Deborah. So I'm just gonna go over this. So trauma informed care is a practice that is seeking to acknowledge and understand that any person, including yourself, can experience trauma, and that the impact of it on your life varies, is subjective, and most importantly, valid. When we care for ourselves and others through a trauma-informed lens, we are offering non-judgment, informed consent, and an expansive space without assumption. There are 6 principles of trauma-informed care: approach, safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice, and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. And why I love it is because you can implement this approach for yourself, your clients, your coworkers, anybody. And I really think that like, even though trauma-informed care has become so like sensationalized and commercialized, that does not mean that we have to feed into that, right? We get to take the the examples and do what we want with it and make it helpful for us and the people in our lives. And then trauma responsiveness, which I learned after trauma-informed care, is taking more of an external approach. So looking at every aspect of a system, not just like your interpersonal interactions, but the system. So in the three things that they talk about are collaborators, language, and environment, and involving it all to better care for all parties. So for your staff, your practice, who are your collaborators? Who are those who trained you at your job, your peers, your supervisors, your visitors, your clients, your patients, and looking and being like, am I practicing non-judgment? Am I practicing informed consent? Am I practicing an expansive space with all these people? Are they practicing this with me? And if not, what needs to shift? Language, how you interact with clients or patients, the way you speak, code switching counts, right? How you respond when a client or patient names a boundary or disagrees with you, how you bring up conflict with your supervisor, policies and where they're posted, and the congruencies of the policies. And something that's really important is the nonverbal energy of the space, right? And then lastly, environment. So like the physical building and the sections of the building, the land the building is on, the position of the building in the city, how easy it is to get to your office, your exam room, like all of those things are going to impact how people who are seeking care for you show up. As a fat child and a fat adult, I've noticed that medical providers, not always, but often, see themselves as also dietitians, which they're not. They can be both, but not always. Morality police and the actual police. Like they have this God complex, right? As just quote unquote doing their job or some combination of all of them. And I've noticed that medical providers can see fat people as annoying, a nuisance, lazy, a disturbance or difficult or dramatic, non-compliant, dangerous sometimes, or not quote unquote fit, which again is like a eugenicist term, right? In this way, medical providers and their behavior in the medical industrial complex itself can often act as an extension of the police. It furthers policing and pathologizing of neurodivergent people, especially if you are neurodivergent and fat, right? Because what happens is that people who have power over you will only choose to see one thing about you. And let's say being fat is the most obvious thing about you. They will choose to see that. And then anything else that's going on with you, like being neurodivergent or being Black or being brown, is like another nuisance to them, a symptom, if you will, right? And not you as a whole complex and complete person. It impacts Black and brown and disabled people and their children who are also fat, similarly to police, and promotes and furthers the adultification, like we talked about before, of Black children. And it furthers trauma within the medical industrial complex. Being traumatized from having to seek care as a fat person is real. So power dynamics. In general, there's always a power imbalance between care workers who work within the medical industrial complex and in community and people seeking care for them, especially if the provider is white and the client is a person of color, if the provider is temporarily able-bodied and the client is disabled in any way, if the client does not have insurance or is on Medicaid, Medicare, HMO, sliding scale, something like that, because then that client does not have the opportunity to exit in the way that others who have that access of insurance do. What does abusing your power look like in a provider-client relationship? It can look like changing the care plan without going over or consulting your client, pushing them physically or emotionally, despite clear indication that they are tired, which risks injury. Saying weird shit like, well, you want to get better, right? Ugh, I hate that. Using the fact that you are fat and struggle to get them to do something they don't want to do. Because again, we as fat people can also promote fat phobia. dismissing their concerns, or obsessed with solving versus supporting. Deborah is saying, would you be able to address meds and surgeries, oh Lord, to treat obesity? Meaning if folks want these options and need insurance to cover the cost, the diagnosis of obesity is often needed. We know these treatments can help with some things, and also they come with side effects and risks. How do we balance their potential benefits and harm? Big topic, I know. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. So one, at the end of the day, I think that fat people deserve to make autonomous decisions for themselves, right? And a lot of times that is deciding to either undergo or not undergo certain treatments that are controversial, right? So they may choose not to undergo surgery. They may choose to undergo surgery. Both, because they're fat, are controversial. For folks who do want to undergo like weight loss treatments and weight loss surgeries, love that for them. Because I really want them to feel good in their bodies and healthy in their bodies. As a provider, I think it's your responsibility to just make sure, like, if possible, give them a full, or at least like half the session, the appointment of just going under the benefits and the risks, like benefits, risks, right? I think that what I've learned from people who have gotten weight loss surgeries is that while they're happy they lost the weight, they were upset that the providers did not tell them about the potential long-term risks, like having to be on specific medications for the rest of their life, right? Having to, somebody had to be on blood thinner for some reason, I can't remember, but like things like that that just like come up and you're just like, what? Nobody told me this, right? And they said that they may have still gotten a surgery, but they would have appreciated knowing everything. And I think that, yes, it's overwhelming, but you can still like give somebody the information and you don't have to go over it completely in an appointment, but they should still have it, you know, both sides. Hold on one second. And so, yeah, it was a message. So, and then also, yeah, this is something, when it comes to like insurance companies, this is something that was similar in a training that I did for therapists, where like the therapist did not want to use pathologizing language. Of course you don't, right? But sometimes you have to, so the insurance companies will cover their mental health expenses. And so in that case, just make sure that you're able to switch back and forth, right? So like insurance companies have to hear the words. They do. They really do. And they don't give a fuck about being better. They don't even want to pay for the shit, right? So and so I would say also let your client know, hey, I know this may suck and you may actually learn it, but this is what I had to put in your file for you to get this coverage. And I just want to let you know that, right? So like, that's one way to be transparent, but also get them the care that they're requesting of you. Thank you for asking. Reducing healthcare worker trauma and fat phobia. So recentering control and promoting and highlighting autonomy. So practicing informed consent, checking in if you notice the person seems anxious, confused, uncomfortable, explaining why exercises, tests, procedures, and medical intervention is necessary. Checking our own internal biases, remembering that the person is an entire human being, being eye level with clients and patients, or sit down when possible. Don't talk to them like children. No baby talk unless they like that. That's fine. How medical trauma can show up, so you know what may be happening, is intrusive thoughts, you know, especially for our OCD baddies. Hey, ruminating, right? Like there were so many times where I just like could not get out of a loop after going to a really horrible appointment. Uncharacteristically low tolerance to pain, and then also uncharacteristically high tolerance to pain. High pain or high discomfort, no touch areas that can result in disassociation, meltdown, and/or pathologization from medical providers. I think it's really important that, that when folks talk about trans and gender expansive folks as like having dysphoria, in fact, people can absolutely have dysphoria as well, and it can show up similarly. Sudden shifts in moods and expressions. Heather says avoiding more medical care, very much so, until it becomes urgent, and then, yep. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and overstimulation. Yay, okay. So some questions to ask people seeking care from you. What does it look like when you're in pain? How do you respond to pain? How do you have ways to cope with pain? Is there anything that worries you, scares you, or stresses you out? What are your goals for each session or in general? Are there any places in your body that are sensitive or no touch or no discussion areas? And what happens? How can I best show up for and with you? A little bit more of what activation can look like. If you notice like something's happening, is lack or loss of concentration, distrust, headaches, irritability, heart racing, getting sweaty all of a sudden, indigestion. When I'm stressed because I have acid reflux that was actually H. pylori induced and didn't get help that I needed in time because of medical fat phobia. So now when I'm annoyed or anxious, I consistently burp. Like I cannot stop until I calm down, right? Sudden mood changes, fear, panic, shame, brain fog. But also know that these can be a sign of a physical issue. I know there's a lot of information, but I just want to give it to you. Okay. But what if it is their weight, and I knew somebody would maybe ask this internally or externally. Okay, what if it is? Some questions we can ask are, could it be something in addition to that? Could their weight be a symptom? What tests have we run? What questions have we asked? Within HIPAA, have you sought out a peer or mentor's opinion? How long have you been seeing them? And is it your business? And so, because I do think that like uninternalizing fat phobia takes time, right? And so like these are some questions that you can ask yourself if you find yourself automatically going to it's this person's weight, right? Navigating difficult situations. So some ways of doing that are like if you want to talk to somebody or your client or your patient, you have a conflict, what are your preferred methods of having hard conversations? Text, phone, email, in person, writing or documenting your feelings and points of discussion. If immediate conversation is not available, I think as like care workers, like we definitely need to like get up on our care work journaling, right? Like it's not just about like journaling our personal lives because so many of us are invested in our people in our communities. We really need to start journaling what the fuck be happening. Identify support people, accountability buddies outside and within your practice. Document your goals for different interactions. And remember that conflict is natural, but that doesn't make it easy. We are almost done. Yeah, we are. So I just wanted to offer this, and this is going to be in the links, Jamie. And this is going to be in the links. So this is Care Work and Care Pods. This started as like a community like project. And it's essentially, it looks like this. Hold on. So this is the pod. And a pod was created to help local communities support each other when violence happens without involving the police. And it has now extended to being able to practice in so many ways. And so I offer this resource to you in a way that you can create your own pod for working on being more fat affirming, neurodivergent affirming, gender affirming, whatever you want, child, or just like being a more aware provider. And so you would put yourself in the center, and then on the innermost circles, those would be like your main, most reliable resources in the forms of people, places, things. So like your favorite article, the thing that you learned in med school or wherever you learned, the coworker that always calls you out and you know is out of love, your bestie, right? And then as you continue with the outer circles, you just add more, right? And so if things happen, you're confused, you're trying to figure out something, you can go back to this pod and be like, what are the resources that I have? And you can look and be like, shit, I got a lot actually. Or if you can't fill out all these bubbles, that's still information to be like, I need more resources, right? So this is, I have 4 scenarios for you, okay? I'm just gonna read through one and tell you the directions so that you know, so that you can work on them with yourself and your peers. So this one is basically, the scene, I have the scene, and then after the scene, these are the questions that I ask, right? So what are the access needs of all parties, specifically the client? What are the additional questions that need to be asked? Who needs to be involved? How can the provider respond in a way that does not exacerbate the situation? And what is necessary in the future? Conversation, boundary, action, and/or repair. And you can use these questions, these questions as a template for anything. And I just like am really excited for you to have this. So there's 4 in total. We're not gonna go through them. Alyssa told me I couldn't. I love you, Alyssa. Some suggestions. Consider your own capacity for being fat affirming, especially if you have preconceived notions of fatness and health. What do you have going on in your life already now? How do you show up for yourself when you're stressed or frustrated at work? Consider your positionality. Yes, the scenarios will be sent out as a care worker. What privileged and marginalized identities do you hold? How do these identities impact who listens to you and your suggestions for care? How do these identities impact how you listen to your clients and patients? Create an emergency safety plan with all levels of workers involved in the planning. So for physical emergencies, but also, especially if we're working towards being more affirming towards marginalized folks, especially fat folks, emotional and mental health emergencies. So maybe a person is having a panic attack post a doctor's appointment. That happens, right? Or otherwise it's an experience where they are dysregulated. What can you do, right, to not exacerbate the situation? Create a resource folder that's accessible for all staff. And when I say resource, I mean resource, not policy, not do this so you don't get sued, but resource folder. And then consider a quarterly check-in or refresher training. Get clear about who do you actually want to show up for and to what level. Get clear about, should you cause harm to a client or patient, how will you repair and what level? Was it just an insult? Was it a fatphobic misdiagnosis? Did it lead to serious injury or death? And I don't mean just insult. Was it an insult? How will you implement and sustain institutional changes? What are your metrics for measuring if you're in actual affirming space? How and who will sustain the flow of communication between hierarchies within your practice? Who is accountable to who and when? And lastly, affirmations for when shit gets hard. I am one person, but I am one person. Community safety is a greater priority than individual annoyance. Ignoring conflict around access creates more conflict and less access. I am allowed to be upset about this. It is my responsibility as a care worker and a human who cares to look beyond my assumptions. Shame is for corporations, resources are for people. A person's access needs do not need to make sense to me to believe them. And then here is the survey. Please scan here or in the chat. And Alyssa will also be putting it in the chat. And thank you so much. Tell your boss to hire me. Love you down. take a picture of all the things. I have an email, I have a website, I have an Instagram, I have another website. So, and thank y'all so much.